Hi! Today we will be learning how to create equations in two variables to represent relationships between quantities and then graph these equations on coordinate axes with labels and scales. We are used to equations with one variable like x plus 1 equals 2. Now we will be working with two variables, x and y. X and y represent numbers that are related to each other. Let's take the equation x plus 1 equals y. Every time you put an example number into the x spot, you can get a number for y. For example, if we say x equals 1, and you put that into the equation in the x spot, you get 1 plus 1 equals y. 1 plus 1 equals 2. You get 2 equals y. In both cases, the y is always 1 greater than the letter x. Whenever you have an equation with two variables, you have four parts. The x variable. Variable means that x can change. The y variable. That also means y can change. So both x and y can be different numbers at different times. The slope and the y-intercept. So let's go over them. Slope represents rise over run, which is the same as how much does y change divided by how much does x change. The slope is written as the letter m. Next, we have our y-intercept. The y-intercept is the y number when x equals 0. The y-intercept is always written with the letter b. So whenever you see a b, think y-intercept. And now, like I said before, the x and y represent numbers that are related to each other. You always see the y variable and x variable related to each other in the equation y equals mx plus b. This is called slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b is the same as saying y equals slope times x plus the y-intercept. This is called slope-intercept form because you can get the slope and the y-intercept from one equation. Let's start with an example so I can explain slope and y-intercept in real life. We're going to start with y equals 1x plus 0, or y equals x. They are both the same thing. Remember, y equals mx plus b. The m is the slope, and the b represents the y-intercept. So in this equation, the 1 is in the m spot, and the 0 is in the b spot. So 1 is the slope, and 0 is the y-intercept. It's as easy as that. All you have to do is look at the equation, look at the m spot and the b spot, and you have your answers. Also, slope represents the change in y divided by the change in x. Since 1 is the slope, that means when x changes by 1 or increases by 1, so if x goes from 1 to 2, y increases by 1, which means y would go from 1 to 2. Or if x goes from 2 to 3, y goes from 2 to 3. The y-intercept represents the y number when x equals 0. Since 0 is the y-intercept, that means x equals 0 and when y equals 0. Let's graph this. First we have to draw a graph. Whenever you draw a graph for two variables, you have to have two different number lines, one for the x number and one for the y number. The two lines meet when x equals 0 and y equals 0. The line starts from 0 and goes to the right. And since the numbers to the right go to really big numbers, we draw an arrow at the end of the line. Now, whenever you create a graph, you want to have straight lines. So you need something straight to draw on. You can use a ruler, but if you don't have a ruler in front of you, you could use another piece of paper. So I'm going to draw the x by using another piece of paper. Okay? Now, we're going to add an arrow at the end of the line because all we're drawing is a small part of the x line. The x line goes on and on forever to the right, getting to big numbers like 3,472. But we're only drawing a small part of it, which is why we need the arrow. So now we need the y line. The y line starts from 0 and goes up. And since the numbers go up to really big numbers, we also have to draw an arrow at the end of this line. So I'm going to start here. The x and y line always intersect at 0. And I'm going to say you can choose wherever you want 0 to be. 0 could be here, 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 anywhere along the line, but I like to have it right at the end because it makes it easier for me to draw the y line. So I'm going to add my arrow. Now this is my y line. And this is the x line, so we're going to label it right next to the arrow x. And this is my y line. I'm going to label it right next to the arrow y. Now, we need numbers on the line. Let's go up by 1. I'm going to label this 0 and 0. So we're going to start with 1, and every time we move over the same distance, draw a small line up and down and add the next number. Let me show you. So we're going to start with x. We're going to move over, draw a line up and down, 1. Move over, draw a line up and down, 2. Move over, draw a line up and down, 3. Move over, draw a line up and down, 4. Move over, draw a line up and down, 5. And we can keep going. But for this problem, we just need up to the number 5. Now we need the y line. It's going to be very similar to the x line, but instead of drawing lines up and down, we need to draw them left and right. So it's going to look like this. Go up, draw left and right, 1. Go up, draw left and right, 2. Go up, draw left and right, 3. Go up, draw left and right, 4. Go up, draw left and right, 5. Again, all we need for this problem is up to 5, but you can keep going for any other problem that you need. Now that we have our graph set up, we have to learn how to put on the x numbers and y numbers. When graphing x numbers and y numbers, they always come in pairs, and the x always comes before y. For example, let's go over here. 1, 0 means x equals 1 and y equals 0. Or 2, 3 is x equals 2 and y equals 3. You will always see points that look like this. X, y. Next, whenever you graph points, you need to graph the x number and y number at the same time. Like 1, 0. You go to the 1 on the x line and the 0 on the y line, and you add a point. I would add a point, but we'll be graphing on this, so I'm just going to show you. Or 2, 3, go to the 2 on the x line, and then find the 3 on the y line while staying on this 2, and you would add a point right here. For graphing y equals mx plus b, all you need to do is find the b, or y-intercept, and then you can graph the rest. Let's go back to y equals x. Remember that the y-intercept is 0, which means when x equals 0, y equals 0. Let's find x equals 0 and y equals 0 on the number line. So look, X equals 0, y equals 0. It's right here. I'm going to draw a dot. A really cool trick that you can do is instead of trying to find both x and y numbers all the time, you can use the slope to draw the rest of the graph. Let me show you. Remember that the slope is 1, which means that y increases by 1 when x increases by 1. So we can do the same thing on our graph. Follow my pencil. Move the x over to 1. We increased x by 1, so now we have to increase y by 1. So we move up by 1 and draw a point. Let's do it again. Move over x by 1, move over y by 1, draw a point. And we keep doing this. Move over x by 1, move over y by 1. Until we finish up to 5 in this graph. Move over x by 1, move over y by 1. And we've graphed all of our points. Now, this isn't complete yet. We do have our points, but it's not a graph yet because we don't have a line. Whenever you have two variables, they're going to create a line. So, to draw on that line, we're going to use a straight edge. So that can be a ruler, a piece of paper. I'm going to use a piece of paper again, and I'm going to draw in the slope. Have a ruler or piece of paper that is straight. Line it up with the points so that you can see about half the points because we want the line to go through the center of the points. So to complete the graph, we have to draw in our line. And like I said about the x line and the y line, you have to add an arrow to the end because this graph is not completed. So we're going to add an arrow to the end. Ta-da! You just graphed your first equation.